Seraphina Ainsworth bolted from St. Bride's a single hour before her wedding, and so they pinned the heavy veil on her plain sister Hester and pushed her up the aisle, because a jilted duke could ruin them, but a married one could not. It happened in the small, cold vestry where the bride was meant to be made ready, and afterward Hester would spend years trying to find the seam in it, the exact moment when the impossible turned into the only thing left to do. She had been standing by the window in her second-best gown, holding her sister's gloves, watching Seraphina be laced and pinned and powdered into the most beautiful bride London had ever sent up an aisle. The maid had just set the wreath of orange blossom in Seraphina's pale hair. Their mother had just said, for the third time, that the Duke was already at the altar, and Seraphina had set down her looking-glass, very calmly, and said that she was not going to marry him. For a moment no one moved. The maid froze with a pin between her lips. Lady Ainsworth's smile stayed fixed on her face a beat too long, the way a clock's hands stay where they are for the breath before they jump. "You are overwrought," their mother said. "It is only nerves. Every bride—" "I am not overwrought, Mamma. I am leaving." Seraphina was already pulling the wreath out of her hair, careless of the strands that came with it. "Gerald is waiting in Cheapside with a chaise. He has a special licence of his own. By tonight I shall be Mrs. Devlin and well out of reach of that statue you have sold me to." She laughed, a high, bright, frightened sound. "Do you know he has not said one warm word to me in 3 months of courtship? Not one. He looks at me the way a man looks at a horse he is about to purchase. I would rather be poor with Gerald than buried alive at Harlow, and I have decided, and you cannot stop me, because if you make a scene the whole church will hear it." She crossed to the side door, the one that gave onto the lane behind the churchyard, where the hired chaise stood waiting, and she paused there only long enough to look back at the room, at her mother and the maid and her younger sister by the window, and for one strange, suspended instant her gaze caught on Hester. "I am sorry, Hetty," she said, and then she was gone, and the side door clicked shut behind her, and the warm gloves were still in Hester's hands. Lady Ainsworth did not scream. That was the thing Hester would remember longest, that her mother met the ruin of everything in perfect silence, dry-eyed and upright in the middle of the vestry, her gaze moving across her remaining daughter, the way a tradesman's moves across a bolt of cloth, measuring, pricing, deciding whether it will do. "Take off your gloves, Hester," she said. "Mamma, the church is full." Her mother's voice had gone flat and quick, the voice of a woman doing sums against a clock. 300 people. The Duke is at the altar. The settlement is signed, and the money is already spent. Spent on this gown and this breakfast, and your brother's school fees, and the debts your father was good enough to die and leave us. If there is no wedding, we are not embarrassed. We are finished, and a man like Harlow does not forgive being made a fool of twice in one lifetime. He will not merely cut us, he will see us ruined for sport. He will know. Hester heard her own voice come out thin. "The instant he sees my face, he will know I am not her. He has never once looked at your face." Her mother was already moving, already lifting the heavy fall of Brussels lace that lay across the chair. He has only ever seen Seraphina the way the whole world sees a beauty, across crowded ballrooms, down the length of a supper table, in a drawing-room full of her admirers, with her mother always at her elbow, always at a distance. He has courted her 3 months and never been near enough to study her, the way one admires a painting one is not permitted to touch. He bargained for a fair, well-born Ainsworth bride, and behind this veil one Ainsworth is very like another. You will keep your eyes down, you will say the words low, and when it is done, and a duchess is a great deal harder to be rid of than a daughter. It is a fraud. Hester's whole body had gone cold. In a church. Before God. My name is not the name on that licence. It is survival. Her mother took her by the shoulders, and her hands were not unkind, which was somehow worse. "Look at me. Your brother is 16. His school is paid for 1 term out of the settlement that vanishes the instant there is no wedding. After that there is nothing. No school, no portion, no roof we can keep past the spring. You have spent your life saying you would do anything for that boy. Here is anything, Hester. It has come for you at last. Will you do it, or will you let us all go down because you could not bear to be brave for half an hour?" And there it was. the one lever in the world that could move Hester Ainsworth, found unerringly, the way her mother had always found it. Tom. She thought of Tom at the breakfast table that morning in his good coat, anxious and proud, telling her the names of all the rivers he would learn at his new school. She thought of the workhouse. She thought, absurdly, that the gloves in her hand were still warm from her sister's fingers. She set them down on the chair. "Eyes down," she heard herself say, and the words low. Her mother let out a breath that might have been triumph or might have been grief. Even later, Hester could never be sure which. The veil came down over her face, and the world turned to fog. The candles beyond the vestry door smearing into gold, the leaded window dissolving into grey diamonds, and somewhere out in the great church the organ swelled, and a clergyman's anxious face appeared in the doorway, and her father's brother, Uncle Edmund, red-faced and reeking of brandy, and pressed into service to give the bride away, took her arm in a grip that shook as badly as her own knees. "Steady, girl," Uncle Edmund muttered. He had not been told which girl. He did not appear to have noticed. "Steady now. Nearly over." The doors opened onto a river of candlelight and silk and 300 turning faces, and Hester Ainsworth, 23, the sister no one had pushed forward in her whole life, was pushed forward now. She walked. The aisle of St. Bride's was the longest road she had ever travelled. Through the lace the world was doubled and soft, and the low silken hum of the ton rose around her on either side. That particular sound the fashionable make when beauty enters a room, a purring, appraising murmur. They thought they were murmuring about beauty. They were murmuring about a lie, and the lie was wearing their admiration like a borrowed cloak, and Hester thought she might be sick into her sister's veil. She fixed her eyes on the flagstones and counted them. It was the only thing that kept her upright. At the end of the aisle the Duke of Harlow was waiting. She had seen him twice before, both times across some crowded room where no one had thought to present the younger Ainsworth daughter to a duke. He was very tall and very still, dressed in grey and black without a single ornament, and his face was the face the Tun had named him for. The marble duke. There was nothing in it at all. Not warmth, not anticipation, not even curiosity. He watched her come the way a man watches the minute hand approach the hour, as a thing scheduled, transacted, and now to be concluded. He did not look at her face. Her mother had been right about that, and the rightness of it turned Hester's stomach over. He looked at the gown, at the famous veil, at the Ainsworth fairness he had been promised, and he saw exactly what he expected to see. He bowed, a precise, economical inclination of the head, nothing more. She sank into a curtsy, mostly because her legs would no longer hold her. The clergyman cleared his throat and began. Afterward, she could never recall all of it, only the parts that cut, the cold of the stone coming up through her thin slippers, the Duke's voice beside her, low and even and entirely without feeling, making his promises to the air, the rustle and creak of 300 people leaning in to watch a great match made. And then the clergyman turned to her, and Hester's blood stopped in her veins, because she had not, until that instant, understood what was about to be required of her. "Seraphina Mary Ainsworth," the clergyman read, his voice carrying gently through the hushed church. "Wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou obey him and serve him, love, honour, and keep him, in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live?" Her sister's name hung in the incense-heavy air. Seraphina. It was the moment the whole fraud turned on, and no one in the great church knew it but the woman trembling beneath the veil. To answer was to take her sister's name into her own mouth before God and lay it down as her own. She felt Uncle Edmund's hand twitch on her arm. She felt the Duke turn his head a fraction toward her, the first flicker of attention he had paid her all morning, waiting. They were all waiting for two small words. A wild voice in her said, "Do not. Lift the veil. Let it all come down here now, cleanly, before the lie is sworn." She thought of Tom and the rivers he would never learn the names of. "I will," she said. She said it low, as she had been told, scarcely above a breath, and the lace and the great vaulted echo and the 300 straining ears all conspired together, and what they heard was a bride overcome, a maiden's modest whisper, and a soft sigh of satisfaction breathed its way round the whole church. No one heard a fraud. They heard romance. The clergyman, who had never in his life set eyes on either Ainsworth sister, and had been engaged only the week before, smiled and moved on, and Hester understood, in a cold rush, that the thing was actually going to work, that the world was so willing to be charmed by a beautiful bride that it would not look closely enough at one to see she was the wrong woman entirely. There was a ring, cold as the flagstones, slid onto her finger over the glove she had not been allowed to remove. There were more words, and the Duke's voice making the last of his vows, and then the words that closed the trap shut, and it was done, and the organ thundered up into the roof, and 300 people rose, and Hester Ainsworth was the Duchess of Harlow, and not one living soul in that church except her own mother knew it. The Duke offered his arm. She laid her gloved hand upon it. Through the lace she watched the long aisle unspool backward beneath her feet, past the smiling rows, out into the grey London morning, and a strange calm settled over her, the calm of someone who has fallen so far that there is no longer any sensation of falling. He does not know, she thought. He still does not know, and at some hour today the veil must come off, and then he will, and I do not know whether this man will ruin me or keep me, and I will not know until it does. The wedding breakfast was held at a great hired house in Mayfair, and it passed in a haze of toasts Hester could not swallow, and congratulations she dared not answer above a murmur. Her mother stayed close at her side, deflecting, explaining away the bride's pallor as the natural agitation of the day, the bride's silence as maidenly nerves. Twice Hester felt the ground shift beneath her. Once an old dowager lifted a glass to her eye and peered very hard at her and said, "She is thinner than I remembered the Ainsworth girl," and Lady Ainsworth laughed lightly and said brides always were, and steered the old woman away by the elbow. Once a young man, who had clearly danced with Seraphina more than was wise, leaned in and said something low and intimate, expecting an arch reply, and Hester only inclined her veiled head and said nothing, and the young man drew back, puzzled and a little hurt, and she watched him decide that marriage to a duke had already cooled the famous Ainsworth warmth. The Duke himself spoke to her perhaps 4 times, each a courtesy so brief and so cold she might have been a stranger seated next to him at a public dinner. He did not lift her veil. Among the great families, her mother had assured her, the veil stayed down through the breakfast, a last modesty before the wedding night, and Hester clung to that small reprieve the way a drowning woman clings to a floating spar. Tom found her once in the crush, and gripped her gloved hand beneath the table where no one could see. He was white under his freckles. "Hetty," he whispered, "what have they done?" "Hush." She pressed his fingers. Of all of them, only Tom had ever truly seen her, and she could not bear for him to be afraid. "It is done now. It cannot be undone. Go and eat something and smile and let me think." So she let them all believe she was thinking, and beneath the veil she said a quiet goodbye to every small future she had ever permitted herself to imagine. The modest country husband, the cottage full of books, the plain children who would have her face and not mind it. Gone, all of it. She had married the coldest man in England under her sister's name, and she did not know whether he would ruin her or keep her, and the not knowing sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. The Duke's travelling carriage took her north as the early dark came down, for the season was guttering out, and all of fashionable London was packing up its trunks for the country, the great houses shutting one by one behind them. He sat across from her, a long grey shape against the window, and for the first hour he did not speak at all. The lights of London fell away behind them. The road grew rough, then smooth, then rough again. She kept her eyes on her gloved hands and waited, and listened to the wheels, and was almost grateful for the dark, because the dark meant the veil could wait a little longer. "You are very quiet," he said at last, "for a bride. I have nothing to say that your Grace would wish to hear." A pause. She felt him turn his head toward her in the blackness. "An honest answer," he said. "I confess I had not expected one." And then nothing more, for a great many miles, only the wheels and the wind and the dark, until at last the carriage turned in at a pair of iron gates and began the long climb up a drive, and Harlow rose out of the night before her like a cliff. She saw it in pieces through the window, a vast pale front of stone, Scores of windows, very nearly all of them dark, a house built to impress visitors and not to shelter anyone. No warmth came off it. 2 lamps burned by the door and a few more in the hall behind, and the rest was a wall of black glass and colder stone going up and up into a starless sky. It was, Hester thought, the man himself rendered in stone, enormous, exacting, and cold all the way through. A housekeeper met them on the steps, a spare, straight-backed woman of perhaps 50, iron-grey hair, a face that had decided long ago to expect nothing of anyone. "Your Grace," she said to the Duke, and curtsied. To Hester she gave a smaller, cooler version of the same. "Your Grace, I am Mrs. Beck. The house is at your service." The house did not feel at her service. The house felt like a museum after closing, all its rooms shrouded, its long galleries breathing dust and cold. Mrs. Beck led her up a great staircase and along a corridor to a suite of rooms that had plainly been opened and aired in a hurry that very day. The Duchess's rooms, untouched for years, perhaps never used at all. A fire had been coaxed into the grate. A supper sat congealing on a tray. A maid waited to undress her. And there, at last, behind a shut door, with the household settling into its night noises around her, the moment came that she had been walking toward since the church. A connecting door opened. The Duke stood in it. He had taken off his coat, and in his shirt-sleeves he looked somehow larger and more human and more dangerous all at once. He crossed the room to her without hurry. She rose to meet him because she would not take the blow sitting down, and he reached up with one hand and drew the heavy veil back from her face. He lifted the veil expecting the beauty he had bargained for, and found instead the sister no one ever looked at twice. She watched it happen. A small frown gathered between his dark brows, the first true feeling to cross his face in a full day, and then he was looking at her, truly looking for the first time, taking in the whole unremarkable face that was so clearly not her sister's. The confusion in his eyes hardened by slow degrees into something colder. "You are not," he said very slowly, "the woman I have been dancing attendance upon for half a season. No, Your Grace. Where is Seraphina Ainsworth?" Hester lifted her chin. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he must see it move the lace at her throat, but her voice, when at last it came, did not shake as much as she had feared. "You have married the wrong Ainsworth, Your Grace," she said, steadier than she felt, "and the vows are already spoken." He stood motionless. The fire cracked in the grate. Somewhere far down in the great cold house a clock began to strike, 11 slow strokes, and she counted every one of them in the silence between. "Explain," he said. Only that. But the word came out of him the way a blade comes slowly out of a sheath. So she told him. She did not soften it, and she did not dress it up, because somewhere on the long road north she had decided that whatever else she might be forced to be in this house, she would not be a liar to his face. She told him that Seraphina had walked out of the vestry an hour before the wedding with a fortune-hunting officer named Devlin. She told him that the settlement was spent, and the church was full, and her mother had pinned the veil on her younger daughter and pushed her up the aisle. She told him that she, Hester, had walked it, and answered to her sister's name before the altar, and that she would not pretend any of it had been honest, because it had not. He listened without expression. When she finished, he turned away from her and went to the window and stood looking out at the black grounds, his hands clasped behind his back, and she could read nothing at all in the set of his shoulders. The marble had come down over his face again the moment her story stopped. "Do you know," he said to the glass, after a silence, "that I have been jilted before?" "No, Your Grace. It is not generally spoken of. I have seen to that." He was quiet a moment. "Years ago, before I came into the title, when I was merely a younger man with prospects and a heart still foolish enough to use, there was a woman. I was idiot enough to want her, to let it be seen that I wanted her. She found a better prospect, a richer one, and rather than tell me she let me discover it for myself, in public, at a card table, with half of London at the other tables watching my face to learn what I would do." His jaw moved. "I learned a great deal that night about the price of wanting things. I decided I would not pay it twice. I would marry, because a duke must marry and must get an heir, but I would marry a transaction. A handsome, well-born bride, a clean settlement, an heir in due season, and not 1 inch of myself surrendered to anyone ever again. I chose your sister precisely because she stirred nothing in me. She was safe. Do you understand? I could not be made a fool of by a woman I did not want. And instead, Hester said quietly, you have been made a fool of after all. He turned. The single bald sentence hung between them. Yes, he said, by the whole of London, the moment the truth gets out, and the truth always gets out. The Duke of Harlow jilted at his own altar and palmed off with the substitute, like a parcel delivered in error. Twice a fool in one lifetime in front of everyone. Then annul it, Hester said. She made herself say it. She had decided on the road north that she would offer him this, and that she would mean it. There are grounds enough to drive a coach through, she went on. I was married under a name not my own. The licence is wrong. The register is wrong. I stood in the church and answered to Seraphina, and any church court in England would set the whole thing aside in a morning. You may be free of me by the autumn, and lay every grain of the blame on my family where it sits. No one will think the worse of you. They will pity you, perhaps, but pity is survivable. I have survived a good deal of it. He looked at her then, with something that was almost interest. And you? He said. What becomes of you, if I do that? I am ruined either way. She said it without drama, because it was simply the arithmetic. The wrong sister, the substitute, the girl who said sacred words under a stolen name. There is no version of tomorrow in which I am not finished in the eyes of the world. I only thought, she said, and here for the first time her voice caught, very slightly, before she steadied it, that you would rather be the one who chose. You have had the choosing taken out of your hands all day by my sister and my mother and 300 guests. I thought I might at least give it back to you. That is the one thing in this whole wretched business that is still yours to decide. She would understand, much later, that this was the thing that stopped him. Not her plainness, and not her honesty alone, but this, that she, standing in the rubble of her own life, with everything to lose and nothing to gain by it, had thought first of giving him back the single thing the day had stolen, the dignity of choosing. The marble duke kept his silence. The fire settled. The clock's 11 strokes had long since died away. No, he said at last, not yet. She looked up. An annulment now is precisely the public scandal I married to avoid, he said. The proctors, the courts, the whispering, every door in London would have the whole of it within the week, and I would be the laughing-stock I have spent 11 years making certain I would never be. I will not hand them that pleasure for nothing. He drew a breath. You will stay. As my wife, in name, until I have decided what is to be done. You will keep to your own rooms and your own company. You will not embarrass me, and in the spring perhaps, when the season is dead and London has found some fresher carcass to pick over, I will see about quietly undoing what your mother did. Is that understood? Perfectly, Your Grace. You will want for nothing material. He moved toward the connecting door and paused with his hand upon it. You will simply want for everything else. I imagine you are accustomed to that. It was a cruel thing to say. It was also entirely true, and Hester let it land without flinching, because flinching would have given him the satisfaction. I am, Your Grace, she said. More than you know. Good night. He stopped in the doorway. For just a moment, she might have imagined it, something crossed his face that was not coldness, something that looked almost like a man surprised to find he had wanted the last word and been denied it. Then it was gone, and the door closed, and Hester Ainsworth sat down at last on the edge of the strange cold bed in the strange cold house, and let herself shake. She did not weep. She had learned long ago that weeping changed nothing. She sat there until the shaking passed, and then she rose and unpinned the heavy veil herself, because the maid had been sent away, and she laid it over the back of a chair where she would not have to look at it, and she said aloud, very quietly, to the empty room, "Very well." He had not ruined her tonight. She had until the spring. A great many things could happen by spring. She did not yet know what, but she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she was not going to spend the winter as furniture. She had been furniture her whole life. She was done with it. The first weeks at Harlow were the loneliest Hester had ever known, and she had known loneliness intimately for years. The Duke kept to his word and to his distance with equal exactness. They dined at the same long table each evening, the two of them marooned at opposite ends of a slab of mahogany broad enough to seat 20, and they did not speak. He read his letters between courses. She watched the candle flames and learned the faces of the footmen, and listened to the small sounds the great house made as it settled into the cold, the long case clock ticking in the hall, the wind finding the loose casements, a door closing somewhere 3 corridors away. She remembered one of those dinners with particular clarity because of how it ended. It was perhaps her 5th night in the house. The soup had been cleared, and the fish and the silence had grown so total that she could hear the candle wax dripping. She had been raised in a noisy, scrambling, anxious household, where silence meant only that her mother was working out a new economy, or her sister sulking over a slight, and she found she could not bear this other silence, this vast, indifferent quiet that seemed to come off the man at the far end of the table like cold off a window. "The fish was very good," she said. Her voice sounded enormous in the room. "You keep a fine table, Your Grace." He did not look up from his letter. "I keep a cook," he said. "She keeps the table. I merely pay for both." That was all. He turned a page. A footman by the door fixed his eyes very hard on the middle distance. Hester felt the blood come up into her face, and she picked up her own fork again and ate the rest of her dinner in the silence she had tried and failed to break, and learned her lesson. He would not be reached across that table. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. She would have to find some other ground. The house gave her the ground. She found the library by accident, in the 3rd week, opening doors at random down a wing she had not yet explored. It was a long, high room, 2 stories of shelves, thousands of volumes, and it was dying. The fire there was never lit. The cold had a damp, breathing weight to it. Along the north wall, a leak in the roof above had left a brown tide line down a whole run of priceless old bindings, and where the damp had reached, the leather had begun to bloom with the soft grey fur of mould. A folio of botanical plates lay open and swollen on a reading stand, its colours run together, ruined past saving. Hester stood in the doorway, and for the first time since the church she felt something other than dread. She felt anger. It was a particular anger, and an old one. She had been raised on borrowed books and cheap ones, had read her whole childhood by candle ends and the last of the daylight, had pawned her own small treasures, a brooch, a length of lace, rather than ever part with a book. And here, in a rich man's house, were thousands of them rotting slowly to ruin through nothing in the world but neglect, because no one in this cold place could be troubled to mend a roof. It was an offence to her in a way she could not have explained to anyone at Harlow, least of all its master. She did not ask his permission. She had decided, somewhere in those frozen weeks, that asking permission was only another way of inviting refusal. She went to Mrs. Beck. She found the housekeeper in the still-room, going over accounts, and she did not come as a supplicant. She came as a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. "The library is being ruined by damp," Hester said. "There is a leak in the roof above the north wall, and it has been left so long that a run of the books is already lost. I want the roof looked at this week, before the next hard rain. I want fires lit in that room morning and evening until it is properly dry. I want the spoiled books taken out, and the rest taken down, and aired, and I will direct the doing of it myself. Send me 2 of the housemaids who are not afraid of a little dust." Mrs. Beck set down her pen and looked at her for a long, level moment. Something shifted, very slightly, behind the flat grey eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the first reluctant reassessment of a creature she had filed away as helpless. "His Grace does not use the library," she said. "His Grace's grandfather assembled it," Hester said. "His Grace's grandchildren may want it, and in the meantime it is mine to save, because I appear to be the only person in this house who cares whether it survives at all. The roof, Mrs. Beck. This week, if you please." There was a silence. Then the housekeeper inclined her head, a small motion, but a real one. "I shall send to the village for the slater in the morning, Your Grace," she said, "and I shall send you Sarah and Lucy. They are not afraid of dust. They are afraid of very little, those 2. The roof was seen to that week. And so it began, not as a campaign, for Hester had no campaign, but as the simple inability of a competent woman to sit idle in a house that needed her. But she had learned her lesson at the dinner table, and she did not try to win anyone. She only worked and let the work be seen. There was one morning in particular that she would remember. She had been in the library with Sarah and Lucy, the three of them grey to the elbows with dust, lifting the great volumes down by the armful and standing them open before the new fires to dry. It was slow, filthy, satisfying work, and Hester had pinned up her sleeves and forgotten herself entirely in it, when she became aware that one of the girls, Lucy, the younger one, perhaps 14, had gone quiet, and then quieter, and then had sat down rather suddenly on the library steps with her face the colour of tallow. "Lucy," Hester crossed to her at once. "What is it? Are you faint?" "It's nothing, Your Grace." The girl tried to rise and could not. "I'm sorry. It's only I've not had my breakfast, nor my supper neither last night." "Why ever not?" Lucy's eyes filled, and the whole of it came out in a rush, the way trouble does when someone finally asks. Her wages went home to her mother, who was widowed and ailing in the village with 3 little ones still at home. There had been a bad week. The girl had been quietly sending her own food down the hill wrapped in a cloth and going without herself, and had told no one because she was new and afraid of seeming a complainer and losing her place. Hester listened to the whole of it, kneeling on the dusty floor in front of the library steps with her sleeves still pinned up. Then she rose and rang the bell, and when the footman came she said, "Bring Lucy a tray, proper food, and hot, and at once, and tell Mrs. Beck I should like to speak with her when she is at leisure." And while they waited, she sat down on the steps beside the trembling girl, a duchess in a dust-grey gown, and talked to her of small ordinary things until the colour came back into her face. Later, with Mrs. Beck, she arranged it quietly. A basket sent down to Lucy's mother every week from the Harlow kitchens, against the housekeeping. The village apothecary asked to call on the widow, and the bill sent up to the house, and Lucy herself moved to a place a little nearer the kitchen warmth, with strict instructions that she was to eat her own dinner before she sent anything anywhere. It cost almost nothing. The Harlow kitchens threw out more in a day than that family needed in a week. It was only that no one had thought to look. "You did not have to do that, Your Grace," Mrs. Beck said afterward, in the still room, and her voice had a careful quality to it, as though she were testing a stair she did not quite trust to hold her weight. "I know," said Hester. "That is rather the point of doing it." The housekeeper said nothing more, but the next morning there were flowers, the first of the snowdrops, from the cold beds along the south wall, on the table in Hester's sitting room, and no one would say who had put them there. It was such small things in the end that changed the temperature of the house, 1 degree at a time. The under-housemaid whose name Hester learned and whose poorly mother she asked after, and whose answer she remembered the next week. The second footman she found reading a borrowed almanac in a window-seat, who braced for a scold and got instead a better almanac out of the library she was rescuing. The cold servants' hall, where she noticed the fire was kept low to save coal and quietly gave orders that it was to be built up, because no one worked well frozen. She did none of it to be loved. She did it because it was wanting doing, and she was there. But the staff noticed all the same, the way people always notice who troubles to see them, and the wary, watchful nothing they had braced to give the fraud bride began, very slowly, to warm into something else. Mrs. Beck was the last to thaw, and Hester respected her for it. The woman had given 30 years to Harlow and its cold master, and she was not about to surrender her caution to a substitute on the strength of a few weeks' good management. But Hester caught her one grey afternoon standing in the doorway of the rescued library, the fires lit, the books aired and back behind their cleaned glass, the brown tide line on the plaster painted over, the whole long room smelling now of beeswax and wood smoke instead of rot, and the look on the housekeeper's face was not caution at all. It was something nearer to grief, the grief of a faithful servant seeing a thing she had loved and given up for lost come quietly back to life. "My mother was still room-maid here," Mrs. Beck said abruptly without turning. "In the old Duke's time, the grandfather. This house was not always cold, Your Grace. There were summers in it. There were children in these passages and music in the evenings, and the old Duke in this very room with a book and a dog at his feet." She stopped. "It went cold when he died, and the present Duke's mother went, and then the business with that woman, years ago. I had thought it would stay cold. I had made my peace with it. Houses are like people," Hester said. "They go cold for a reason, and they can be warmed for one. Both take patience, and neither happens all at once." Mrs. Beck looked at her then, fully, for the first time. "You are not what we were told to expect," she said. "No," said Hester. "I am the wrong sister. Everyone is quite agreed upon that. And Mrs. Beck, austere, iron-grey, 30 years frozen Mrs. Beck, surprised them both. "I am not so sure they are right, your grace," she said, low, and then gathered up her keys and went, stiff-backed, about her business before either of them could make anything more of it. It was the first kindness Hester had been given in that house, and she stood a long while in the warm library after the housekeeper had gone, holding it carefully as one holds something that might break. The Duke, through all of this, appeared to notice nothing, or so Hester believed. In fact, Benedict Ridley noticed a great deal. He noticed that the library, which he had not entered in 11 years because he could not cross its threshold without seeing his grandfather in the great chair by the fire, now had a fire in it again, and a faint warm light beneath its door of an evening. He noticed that his linen had become fine again, and his still room stocked, and that the servants moved through his house with a lightness he had not seen since he was a boy. He noticed that the youngest housemaid, who had used to flinch and press herself to the wall when he passed, now dropped him a curtsy with something almost like ease. He noticed that the second footman had begun, against every rule of his training, to look very nearly happy, and he noticed, though he would not have admitted it to a living soul, that the silent woman at the far end of his table had not, in all these weeks, asked him for one single thing. Not money, not jewels, not access, not affection, not even conversation, after that one rebuffed attempt over the fish. She, who had every reason on earth to plead her case, to charm him, to work upon him for her own preservation, simply ate her supper and inclined her head and went away to her books and her quiet, competent salvage of his ruined house, and asked him for nothing at all. He found, to his very great irritation, that he did not understand her, and the Duke of Harlow was not accustomed to being unable to understand the people who were in his power. It was Lord Carrick who said it aloud, as Carrick always said aloud, the things Benedict would not. Carrick rode over from his own place some 20 miles distant in the dead middle of that first winter, blunt, cynical, the one man in England who spoke to the Marble Duke as though he were merely a man, and the only living soul to whom Benedict had told the whole truth of his wedding day in a single grim letter written the week after it, and he stayed 3 days, and on the second of them he ran his friend to ground in the study with 2 glasses of brandy and a look of frank, unkind amusement. "You are aware," Carrick said, settling himself by the fire, "that your house has caught fire?" Benedict looked up from his ledger. "I beg your pardon." "Warmth, Ridley. The place is committing the unspeakable crime of warmth. I have been here 2 days, and a housemaid smiled at me, and the soup was hot, and there were flowers in February, on the hall table. Your grandfather's library has risen from the dead. I walked past it last night, and there was a fire lit and a smell of beeswax, and I confess I stood in the passage a full minute, thinking the old man's ghost had finally come for you." He swirled his brandy. "Your housekeeper, whom I have personally watched freeze a footman solid at 20 paces, defended your Duchess to me this morning entirely without being asked to. I came north expecting to find you sitting in a tomb nursing your humiliation. Instead, I find you living, against your evident wishes, in something that has the distinct and alarming character of a home. What in God's name has the little substitute done to your house?" "Nothing," Benedict said. "She manages the household. It is what a wife does." "It is what a wife does when she hopes to be cherished," Carrick said. "It is not, in my admittedly limited experience, what a wife does when she's been told plainly that she will be quietly annulled in the spring and turned out into the world ruined. That wife sulks, or she schemes, or she weeps prettily in front of the staff to lay up a store of pity against the day." He set his glass down. "Yours rescues a library no one will let her keep, and learns the names of servants she has been told are not hers, and asks you for nothing. Tell me, Ridley, in your wide experience of being wanted by people for what you can give them, what does she want?" Benedict opened his mouth and found he had no ready answer and closed it again. "I do not know," he said. "There," said Carrick softly, "is the most interesting thing you have said to me in 5 years. The Duke of Harlow does not know what a person wants. I would hold on to that one, were I you, if only as a natural curiosity." Benedict did not answer, but that night, after Carrick had gone up, he did a thing he had not done in 11 years. He went to the library. He went late, when he believed the house asleep, the way a man returns in secret to a grave. He half expected even now to find the dust and the damp and the wreck of his grandfather's life work, and to be able to be angry about it. Instead, he found a clean, warm room with a banked fire and a single lamp still burning low, and his wife asleep in the great chair beside it, his grandfather's chair, with an open book fallen against her breast and her plain face, in sleep, gone soft and young and entirely unguarded. He stood in the doorway a long time and looked at her, truly looked, for only the second time in their marriage. The first had been the night he lifted the veil. He looked at the ink stain on the side of her finger, and the careful repair she had made to the cracked spine of the book in her lap, and the way the low firelight moved in her ordinary brown hair. He thought of his grandfather, the one warm man of his cold boyhood, who had loved this room and read to a small frightened nephew in it on winter nights, and he felt something shift in his chest that he had spent 11 years, and a very great deal of effort, ensuring would never shift again. It frightened him. He recognized the feeling after all this time, the way one recognizes the first ache of an old wound in changing weather, and the recognizing of it told him precisely how dangerous it was. This is how it begins, he thought. This is exactly how a man is made a fool. You let yourself notice a thing, and then you want it, and then it is taken from you in front of everyone. He should have woken her and sent her coldly up to bed. He meant to. Instead, he took the carriage rug from the back of the sofa and laid it over her, very carefully so as not to wake her, and he stirred the fire and built it up so that it would not die before morning, and he stood over her one moment more, and then he went away again as silently as he had come, furious with himself the whole length of the dark corridor, and unable for all his fury to undo it. In the morning, Hester woke beneath a rug she had no memory of pulling over herself, in a chair grown stiff under her, the fire still alive in the grate, and she sat there a while and understood slowly what it meant. She hardly dared let herself hope, because hope, she had long ago learned, was the cruelest fraud of all. But she folded the rug with great care before she left the room, and left it on the chair, well away from where it had been. That was the first crack. They are always small, the first cracks. A rug, a banked fire. A man who could not, in the end, leave a sleeping woman to wake cold in the room his grandfather had loved. After that, the silence at the dinner table began, by slow degrees, to break. But it broke properly this time, in a real conversation, and Hester would always be able to say afterward exactly when it had happened. It was the books that did it. He could not, in the end, help wanting to know what she was reading. This wife he did not understand. And one evening abruptly, between the removal of the meat and the setting down of the fruit, he asked her, "What is it," he said, "that keeps you up half the night in my grandfather's library?" She was so surprised that she answered honestly, without first measuring the answer for safety. She named the book, a history, a dry, difficult one that few women and not many men troubled to finish, and she told him what she thought of its author, which was a good deal, and not all of it kind. Benedict set down his glass. "You are wrong," he said. "About the author. He is the finest historian of the age." "He is the most fashionable," Hester said. "It is not the same thing. He writes beautifully and reasons badly, and he flatters the powerful in every chapter, which is why the powerful think him so fine. He has decided what happened before he has read the evidence, and then he arranges the evidence to suit. I would rather read a dull man who is honest than a brilliant one who is bought." There was a silence. She thought, with a lurch, that she had gone too far, that she had been too sharp, too sure to a man who had been deferred to his whole life. She braced for the marble. Instead, the Duke of Harlow leaned back in his chair and looked at her down the length of the long table, with an expression she had not seen on him before. He looked interested. "Defend that," he said. "The charge that he arranges his evidence. Give me an instance or withdraw it." And she did. She gave him 3, and he disputed all 3, well and hard, and she answered him. And somewhere in the middle of the second one she forgot to be frightened, and somewhere in the middle of the third he forgot to be cold, and the footman by the door had, very quietly and without being told, withdrawn and shut the door behind him, and the two of them argued history across the candlelight until the fire burned low and the fruit sat forgotten on its dish. It was the first true conversation of their marriage, and it ended, absurdly, with the Duke saying, "You are still wrong about the third instance," and Hester saying, "I am not, and I shall prove it to you tomorrow, if you will lend me the key to the cabinet where the old quartos are kept." And the Duke, after a startled pause, taking a small key off his own watch chain and walking the length of the table to set it down beside her plate. "There," he said. "Prove it, then." And he stood there a moment longer than he needed to, looking down at her, this plain, sharp woman who argued with him as though his rank were no more than a coat he happened to be wearing. And then he bid her good night and went, and Hester sat alone with the key warm in her hand and the strangest feeling stirring under her ribs, a feeling she was afraid to name. After that, they dined nearer one another, by unspoken agreement and small daily increments. First she moved up the table, to be out of the draught, she said, and he let the small fiction stand. Then, a few nights later, he moved down it. By the deep of winter they sat within easy speaking distance, and the suppers grew long, and the footman learned to set down the brandy and disappear, and the two of them talked. They talked of books, and then of history, and then of the land, and then, by slow, careful steps, of less safe things, of his grandfather once, of her childhood, in which she had been the plain afterthought to her sister's Blaze, the useful one, the one sent to fetch and carry and never to be looked at, of the long cold years of his since the card table. Benedict Ridley discovered that he had been starving for 11 years, for a thing he had never thought to name, the plain, ordinary company of one person who saw him, for she did see him. That was the thing that undid him, slowly, across that long, thawing winter. Every other soul in his life saw the Duke, the rank, the wealth, the cold, the thing to be flattered or feared or fled. Hester saw the man. She saw that his coldness was a wall and not a nature. She saw the boy who had been jilted at a card table and had decided never again to want anything. She saw the grief that lay under the marble, and she neither flinched from it nor tried to charm it away. She simply sat with it, and with him, in the warm room his grandfather had loved, and let him be, for the first time in his adult life, merely a man in a chair by a fire, talking, in no danger. The day she said the thing he would never forget. They were riding. He had taken to riding out across the estate with her, first on the pretext of showing her the land, then on no pretext at all, having simply run out of reasons to keep away from her, and stopped troubling to invent new ones. It was a raw, bright morning at the very end of winter, the first green showing in the hedgerows, and they had ridden down through the home farm, and Hester had startled him again. She knew it. She knew the home farm. She had asked the Hartleys by name after their new baby. She had asked old Marsh whether his cough had mended. She had wanted to know whether the Coles barn had stood the winter storms, and had been distressed to hear that it had not. He drew up his horse on the rise above the farm and looked at her. "How," he said, "do you know all this? You have been here 3 months. I have been master of it 11 years. And Hester reined in beside him and looked out over the fields that were his, and the cottages whose roofs she had been quietly seeing, mended through the winter. And she said the thing, not to wound him, and not to win him, but only because he had asked. And it was true. "My sister would have charmed every guest at your table and despised every man on your land," Hester said. "I can charm no one, but I have already learned the name of every tenant on your home farm, and which of their roofs let in the rain." It went into Benedict Ridley like a key into a lock he had forgotten he was carrying, because it named in one quiet sentence the whole difference between the woman he had bargained for and the woman he had got, between being admired and being seen, between a wife who would have ornamented his cold house and a wife who, unasked, unthanked, expecting nothing, had been warming it from the inside since the day she arrived. He gave her no answer on the rise. There was nothing he trusted himself to say. But that night, after supper, he kept her with him in the library, the two of them in their chairs before the fire, and they talked until the candles guttered low, and when at last she rose to go, he caught her hand. It was the first time he had touched her since the ring went on at the altar. He held it a moment, awkwardly, a man badly out of practice, and he said, low and rough and entirely unlike the marble Duke, "I am glad it was you who walked up the aisle. God help me. I never thought to say such a thing, but I am glad it was you, and not her." And Hester, who had been called the wrong sister for 3 months by a whole county, stood very still with her hand in his, and felt the word wrong loosen at last, its long grip on her heart. She lay awake late that night and made herself be honest, because she had built whatever this was on honesty and would not begin lying now, even to herself. She was in love with him. There was no use pretending otherwise. She had perhaps been a little in love with him since the morning she woke beneath a rug she had not pulled over herself, and the loving had only deepened with every cold wall of his she watched come down. It was a foolish, dangerous thing to feel, with the spring coming, the spring of the promised annulment, and her whole security resting on the whim of a man who had sworn, with cause, never to want anything again. She knew all of that. She felt it anyway. The truth was a great deal more dangerous than any fraud her mother had ever pushed her into, and she lay in the dark, and held it, and was afraid. She had begun to love the coldest man in England, and the spring was coming, and with the spring, though neither of them knew it yet, came Seraphina. The letter came, in April, on cream-laid paper that smelled faintly of her sister's scent, and Hester knew the hand before she had broken the seal. Seraphina wrote as Seraphina had always written, beautifully, charmingly, with that gift of hers for making the reader feel singled out and chosen. She wrote that she had been a foolish girl. She wrote that Captain Devlin had proved a scoundrel of the deepest dye, that the marriage she had run away to make had never in fact been made at all, that she had been abandoned, penniless, in a cold coastal town with her reputation in ruins, and no one in the wide world to turn to but the family she had so cruelly wronged. She wrote that she was coming up to London to throw herself upon her mother's mercy, and she begged her dear, her only sister Hester to receive her, for the sake of the tender love they had borne one another as children. There had been no such love. They both knew it. But the letter was not truly for Hester, and Hester understood that the moment she read it. The letter was a white flag run up ahead of an advancing army, and the war it announced was for everything Hester had only just, against all her own good sense, begun to let herself want. She brought the letter to her husband at breakfast. She had learned, over the long, thawing winter, that she could not bear to keep things from him. Whatever else lay between them, she had built it on the one thing she had refused to surrender, even on the wedding night, which was the truth. He read it through twice. She watched the marble come down over his face as he read, a thing she had not seen happen in weeks, and her heart sank to see how easily it still came. "Your sister," he said at last, setting the letter down, "discovers a use for her family at the precise moment her officer discovers she has no money. How very fortunate for us all." "She has no use for the family," Hester said quietly. "She has a use for you. She always did. She left because she believed she had found something better. She has discovered that she had not, and now she is coming back for what she threw away. She cannot have it. She is nothing to me. She was never anything to me. I told you so the first night, and it was true. I know that." And she did know it. She believed him entirely. But she had been alive 23 years, and had spent every one of them watching her sister, and she knew a thing her husband in his confidence did not. "But she is very beautiful, Benedict, and very clever, and she has nothing left in the world to lose, which is what makes a person dangerous. You taught me that yourself, the first night. And she has the one weapon that can take all of this away from us." She touched the letter where it lay between the coffee pot and the toast. She was the contracted bride. The settlement names her. The license names her. The register names her. She stood at no altar, but the law believes she ought to have, and the law does not yet know she was not there. If she chooses to stand up and say that this marriage is a fraud, that I impersonated her, that the vows were stolen out of her mouth, she will have every paper in England arrayed on her side, and we will have only the truth, which is the very thing that damns us. Benedict was silent a long moment. He had not, she saw, followed it all the way to its end. He had been too occupied this thawing winter learning how to want a thing, and a man only learning to want is always slow to see how the thing can be taken from him. "Then we do nothing to invite it," he said. "We do not receive her. We give the gossips no fresh meat. It will pass." But they could not stop her from coming to London, and they could not stop the new season from opening that spring, and they could not stop the Ton, that relentless, tireless whisper machine, from doing the one thing it did best in all the world, which was to scent out a secret and feed upon it. For the truth had begun, at last, to leak. There were murmurs now in the right drawing rooms, the first faint stirrings of the very scandal Benedict had married to Berry, that the Duke of Harlow had been jilted at his own altar and married off, like a parcel, to the substitute sister, the wrong bride. And into that gathering whisper Seraphina Ainsworth came back to London, beautiful as ever, tragic now, the wronged and repentant elder daughter, and began with the most exquisite care to tell her story. Hester saw the shape of it before anyone else did. She had spent her life reading rooms, and she read this one. Seraphina's story was a masterpiece, and the cruelty of it was that it was very nearly true. Seraphina did not deny that she had run. She confessed it prettily, with downcast eyes, the impulsive, forgivable sin of a girl deceived by a practised, wicked man. But over that confession she laid a second story, and the second story was poison. In Seraphina's telling, she had been coming back, coming to her senses, hastening home to honour her engagement, only to discover, too late, that her own family had stolen her place while she was gone, that her grasping mother and her plain, jealous, unmarriageable younger sister had seen their chance and seized it, had dressed Hester up in Seraphina's veil and Seraphina's name, and tricked a grieving duke into speaking vows he never meant, to a woman he had never so much as chosen. In Seraphina's telling, Hester was no victim pushed up an aisle. Hester was the schemer, the marriage was the fraud, and Seraphina was the wronged true bride, come home to reclaim what the law itself said was hers by right. It was so close to the truth that it could not simply be denied, and it had the further fatal advantage that all of fashionable London wished to believe it, because a plain woman who steals a duke is a far more delicious story than a plain woman who saves her family, and the Ton has never in its history preferred the kinder tale. Their mother, of course, came down at once on Seraphina's side. Lady Ainsworth had engineered the swap to save the family, but Lady Ainsworth had only ever truly served one cause, which was her own advancement, and she could read a London drawing-room as well as either of her daughters could. A ruined Hester quietly annulled was worth precisely nothing to her. A triumphant Seraphina restored to a duke was worth everything, and so the very woman who had pinned the veil on Hester with her own hands now let it be understood, with a great many sorrowing sighs and dabbings of the eye, that the dear duke had indeed been most cruelly imposed upon, and that the rightful bride had at last come home, and that the whole sad business might yet be set right, if only his grace would consent to do the honourable thing. And Benedict, with all of it coming at him at once, the leaking scandal, the returning beauty, the legal papers that armed her, the public unmaking he had built his entire cold life to avoid, Benedict did the thing he had always done when the world came too close. He retreated. Hester felt it happen and was powerless to stop it. They had come up to London for the season, because to hide in the country now would only confirm the whispers, and in London, day by day, she watched the marble come back down over her husband, and it broke her heart the more for knowing exactly why. It happened fittingly at a dinner, though this time it was a dinner in the great cold Mayfair house, just the two of them, as it had been at the beginning. He had been shut in his study all day with his lawyers. He came to the table silent. He read no letters this time. He simply did not speak, and when she spoke he answered in the old way, in courtesies with nothing behind them, and the easy warmth they had built across a whole winter of candlelit suppers was gone, as though it had never been. She tried, once, to reach across to him, said his name, said that whatever came, they would meet it together, and he set down his fork with a precision that was worse than any anger and said, "Together. Yes, I dare say, that is what one says." And he looked at her, and for one terrible moment she saw, behind his eyes, not coldness, but the thing the coldness had always been built to hide, fear, naked and old. "Do you know what I find, madam, now that I sit and consider it? I find I have been a fool again after all. I let myself—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "It does not signify. We will get through the season. My lawyers are looking into the matter of the register. You need not trouble yourself." And he rose and left his dinner half-eaten and went back to his study, and Hester sat alone at the long table in the candlelight and understood that she was losing him, that he was retreating back behind the wall, not because he wanted her less, but because he had at last let himself want her too much. and the wanting had woken every terror he had spent 11 years asleep on top of. She understood it. She even forgave it. But understanding a thing does not stop it from breaking your heart. And the old word came creeping back into the corners of her mind, in the cold voices of the ton. Wrong. The wrong sister. The wrong bride. The placeholder. The fraud. The one who was only ever standing in. Seraphina naturally called. She came on an afternoon when she knew the Duke to be from home, and she came in half-mourning grey that made her fair beauty look pure and tragic and ill-used, and the servants, who did not yet know they were permitted to refuse her, showed her up to Hester's drawing-room, and the two sisters sat across from one another over a tea that neither of them touched, and Seraphina let fall, for Hester alone, the lovely mask she wore for the rest of the world. "You have done remarkably well for yourself, little sister," she said, smiling, looking about the handsome room. A duchess, who would ever have credited it? Plain little Hester, who could not get a country curate to look at her twice, the Duchess of Harlow. She set down her cup with a small click. "But you and I both know it is borrowed plumage. You are wearing my name. You said my vows. He bargained for me, courted me, and married me, and you merely stood in. You are the understudy who walked on when the leading lady was indisposed, and I am afraid the audience is beginning to notice." "I know exactly what I am," Hester said. "I have never pretended otherwise, not to him, not to myself, not from the first hour. You are the one who deals in pretending, Seraphina. You always have. It is the difference between us. How sharp you have grown!" The smile did not waver. "Country air, I suppose, but sharpness will not save you, dearest. So let me be kind for old time's sake, and tell you plainly how this ends, that you may at least have the dignity of choosing your part in it." She leaned forward. "I'm going to have this marriage declared void. I've already spoken with a proctor, a lawyer of the church courts, where such things are decided. I have the settlement, the license, the register, all of them in my name, every one. The law will agree with me because the law deals in papers, and the papers are mine. And when it is void, Benedict will be free, and he will be a man freshly and publicly embarrassed and badly in need of a respectable, beautiful wife to mend his consequence. And there I shall be, repentant, lovely, the bride he was always meant to have. He will take me, because it is the cleanest possible way to bury the scandal, and you," the smile sharpened to a fine point, "you will go quietly home to nothing, the wrong sister, the footnote, and in 2 seasons, I promise you, no one in London will so much as recall your name. Unless," she added, sitting back, "you are sensible. Step aside now, quietly. Tell the proctor the truth, that you impersonated me, that the marriage was a fraud from the altar, and I will see you provided for. A small allowance, a cottage somewhere green and far away. I can be generous, Hester, when I have what I want. I always could." Hester looked at her sister steadily, and what she felt was not the rage that Seraphina was angling for, nor the fear. What she felt, to her own quiet surprise, was clarity, the cold, clean clarity of a woman who has already lost everything once, and has therefore learned exactly what she is and is not, willing to lose a second time. "No," Hester said. "No, no." She set down her own cup, and she found that her hand was steady. "You think you understand what passes in that house, Seraphina, but you have made the same mistake you have made your whole life. You think a thing is only ever worth what the world will pay for it. You want him because he is a duke and rich and desirable, now that another woman has been seen to warm him, and because having him would mend your consequence. You have not the faintest idea who he is. You never troubled to learn. You sat through 3 months of his courtship, and could not be bothered to discover one true thing about the man. You told me so yourself, in the vestry, the morning you ran." She drew a breath. "I troubled to learn. I know the name of every tenant on his home farm. I know what he reads and what he grieves and why he went cold, and exactly what it has cost him to begin, just barely, to thaw. I know the man. You know the title. And you have spent your life believing the two are the same thing, because to you they always have been." She rose to end the visit, and she did not raise her voice. "Take your case to your proctor," she said. "Bring your papers. Do your worst before all of London if you must. But do not sit in my drawing room and offer me a cottage to surrender my husband, because you have nothing in the world that I want, and I have stopped. I have entirely and forever stopped, being a thing that is handed from one person to another for their convenience. Now you will forgive me. I find I have a great deal to do." Seraphina rose too, and the mask was wholly gone now, and what lay beneath it was not beautiful at all. "He does not love you," she said, low and vicious. "He chose me, Hester. Whatever winter games the two of you have played up there in that mausoleum, when the choice is laid before him in the open, before everyone, between the beauty he bargained for and the plain little fraud he was tricked into, he will choose me. They always do. You will stand in a ballroom in your sensible grey gown, and you will watch him choose me, and then, at last, you will know your place." And she swept out in a swirl of tragic grey, and Hester stood alone in the drawing-room with her heart pounding hard at last, now that there was no one left to see it pound, because the truly terrible thing about her sister's parting shot was this: Hester did not know, in the deepest part of herself, that it was false. He had gone cold again. He had retreated. He had not chosen her. He had been tricked into her, and now the world was holding out to him the clean, easy escape he had wanted from the very first night, with the beautiful bride thrown in as recompense and the scandal buried in the bargain. Why would such a man not take it? Why would a man who had organized his whole existence around never wanting and never risking choose the fraud, the footnote, the plain wrong sister, over the bargain and the beauty and the end of all his trouble? She did not know, and the not knowing was the cruelest thing she had carried since the morning in the vestry, the night before the great ball, the Marchioness of Holland's ball, the largest crush of the season, the very arena Seraphina had chosen for her public reclaiming. Anne came to her. Anne was Hester's one true friend, a lady's maid she had known since girlhood, the only person besides Tom who had ever looked at Hester and seen a person rather than a useful absence. And Anne had sharp eyes, and Anne lived below stairs where everything is known first. "Your Grace," Anne said, low, in the dark of the dressing-room with the door shut, "I would not bring you servants' gossip if it were only gossip. But it is not only gossip. Miss Seraphina's officer, Captain Devlin, he is in London. He has been seen. And he is not here to wish her joy, Your Grace. Quite the reverse." She twisted her apron in her hands. "He paid for the elopement, you see, the chaise, the rooms, the lodging on the coast, all of it on the promise of her dowry. When the dowry never came, he abandoned her, just as she says. But now he has heard the wind has changed, that she is to land herself a duke after all, and he has come up to town to collect what he is owed. He is hounding her for the money, Your Grace, hard, and he has letters, the letters she wrote him before the wedding, when she was laying the whole plan. They are still in his keeping, and he has let it be known he means to use them, one way or another, to get his money out of her." Hester went very still because she understood at once that Anne had just laid in her lap the means to destroy her sister utterly, the elopement letters, in Seraphina's own unmistakable hand, the fortune hunter's debt papers, proof, undeniable, in black ink, that Seraphina had not been an impulsive girl deceived and hurrying home, but a calculating woman who had planned her flight for weeks, paid for it, written for it, and come crawling back to England only when her chosen scoundrel ran out of her money and threw her over. With those papers surfaced in the right place at the right moment, Seraphina's whole beautiful story would collapse to powder, and her legal case would collapse with it, and the wrong true bride would stand revealed before all of London as exactly the thing she was. Hester held the knowledge a long moment, and felt the full weight of it, and the cold clarity came over her once more, and she made her choice. She would not use it the way Seraphina would have used it. She would not scheme in the dark, or plant the poison herself, or set a trap, or whisper a ruin into being. That was her sister's way, and the whole of Hester's hard-won self refused it. But neither would she throw the truth away out of some false delicacy, and let it rot in her hands while her sister stole her life with a lie. The truth was the only weapon Hester had ever owned, and she had never yet misused it, and she would not begin now in either direction. So she did the one thing that was wholly, cleanly hers to do. She went to find her husband. He was in his study, late, alone, a single branch of candles burning, and a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow, and he looked up when she came in with the old wall already half raised in his face. She crossed to the desk and laid down a folded paper she had written out in her own hand. Everything Anne had told her, plainly, without embellishment. Where Devlin lodged, what debts he held, what letters were in his keeping, and what they would prove. "This is everything I know," she said, "about my sister, and the officer, and the debts, and the letters she wrote when she was planning her flight. It is the truth, and it would ruin her past any saving, and I have brought it to you." She kept her hands at her sides. "I will not tell you what to do with it, Benedict, because it is not mine to decide. You may use it to save us. You may judge it too cruel and burn it. Or you may decide, as you have every right to decide, that the cleanest road out of all this trouble runs through her after all, and never read a word of it. I have not had it whispered in a single club. My name is on nothing. The choosing is entirely yours." He looked at the paper, and then up at her. "You could have taken this to Carrick," he said slowly. "He would have had it round every table in London by tomorrow noon, and your sister destroyed, and you nowhere near it. Why bring it to me?" "Because she is my sister," Hester said, "and if she is to be destroyed, the doing of it is not a thing I will arrange in the dark to spare myself the weight of it. And because—" her voice caught, just once, and she made it go steady again. "Because if you are going to choose the clean road, Benedict, the road that runs through her, then I would far rather you chose it knowing everything, than that I tricked you onto the hard one. I have already been the instrument of one deception in this family. I will not become the author of another, not even to save myself, not even to keep you." And she turned, and she left him there with the truth folded on the desk in front of him, unopened, the candle burning down beside it, and she went up to her cold room, and she did not sleep, and she did not know, even now, even at the very end of it, what he would do. The Marchioness of Holland's ball was the great crush of the season, and the whole of fashionable London came to it, and so did the scandal. Hester went, because to stay away would have been to concede the field, and she had decided she would concede nothing without standing on it first. She dressed plainly, as she always dressed, a gown of deep grey blue, no jewels at all but her wedding ring, her ordinary brown hair simply done, because she had no gift for dazzling and no intention whatever of pretending to one. She would go as herself. If she was to be unmade tonight before all of society, she would be unmade as the woman she actually was, and not as some painted imitation of the sister she could never be, and had stopped, somewhere over the long winter, wishing to be. Benedict had not spoken to her of the paper. He had not told her what he meant to do. He had been shut in his study the whole of that day, and gone the whole of the afternoon, and he had handed her up into the carriage with a face of perfect unreadable marble, and they had ridden to the ball through the lamplit streets in a silence with her entire future folded up inside it. She did not know whether she rode beside a husband or a stranger. She did not know whether the truth had been used, or burned, or carried off to Seraphina as a peace offering. She knew only that she would find out tonight, in public, before everyone, exactly as her sister had promised her she would. Seraphina was magnificent. Of course she was. She arrived late and luminous, in white and silver, the very picture of wronged and repentant virtue, and the great rooms turned to watch her the way they had always turned to watch her, and the whisper machine roared up into full voice. There she is, the true bride, the one he was meant to have. They say the marriage is to be set aside within the month. They say the poor Duke was shamefully tricked. On her arm, sleek and certain of victory, sailed Lady Ainsworth, who had pinned the veil upon one daughter with her own hands, and now glided into the ballroom beside the other, ready to bask in whichever triumph the night produced for her. Hester saw the trap laid out and admired, in a distant cold way, the patience of it. Seraphina did not rush. She let the rooms fill. She let the whispers ripen. She danced, and was admired, and was tragic, and laid her ground drawing-room by drawing-room across the whole length of the evening, until the entire assembly was primed and leaning in, every eye flicking between the luminous true bride and the plain grey substitute who stood so quietly by the wall, and the Duke, who had not all evening gone to either of them. And then, near midnight, when the great gilded ballroom was at its fullest, and the guests had drifted in from every other room to see the thing they had all really come to see. Seraphina made her move. She crossed the floor to the Duke of Harlow, her mother a step behind her, a proctor's clerk hovering at the edge of the crowd with a leather case of papers held against his chest, and she sank down before him into a curtsy of the most exquisite, the most public, penitence, and she spoke in a voice pitched with great and careful art to carry into the farthest silenced corner of the room. "Your Grace, I have wronged you, and I have come before all our friends to make it right." A perfect tremor entered her voice. "I was a foolish girl, and I ran from the greatest honour of my life, and I have suffered for it every hour since. But I have come home. I'm the bride you contracted for. My name is on the settlement, on the licence, on the register before God. The vows you spoke that day were spoken to me, in the eye of the law, if not in fact, and the woman who stood in my place did so by a deception I knew nothing of, a deception worked by my own family to keep us from ruin. I do not blame her." A gracious, devastating little glance toward Hester by the wall. "Indeed, I pity her, but a fraud cannot stand, Your Grace, however kindly it was meant. The marriage is void, the law will say so, and I have come humbly before everyone who loves us both to ask you, let us set right what was made so terribly wrong. Let the true bride take her place at last." The silence when she finished was total. Hundreds of people held their breath as one. It was the most exposed moment of Benedict Ridley's life, the precise, complete public humiliation he had spent 11 cold years building his every defence against, laid out before all of London, with a beautiful woman kneeling at the heart of it, and the whole room leaning in to watch the marble duke either crack down the middle or shatter. And across that silent, glittering room, Hester met her husband's eyes for the first time all night. She gave them nothing to feed on, no plea, no tears, no performance. She had nothing left to perform with and no wish to begin. She only stood plainly as herself in her grey-blue gown by the wall, with her wedding ring on her bare hand, and she let him see her, and she let him choose, because choosing was the one thing she had given him on the first night, and the one thing she would not take back now, whatever it cost her. Benedict Ridley looked at the woman kneeling before him. Then he looked, the whole length of that crowded room, at the woman standing quietly against the wall, who wanted nothing from him but the truth and had asked him for nothing else. And he made his choice. "Get up, Seraphina," he said. It was not loud, but the room had gone so silent that it reached every corner, and there was something in it, some absolute, settled finality, that brought a deeper stillness down over the crowd. Seraphina rose slowly, and for the first time that night a flicker of real uncertainty crossed her lovely face. "You speak of fraud," the Duke said, and now he let his voice rise deliberately, so that it carried, so that not one soul in that vast room could fail to hear a word of it. "And of papers, and of the true bride. Very well, you have chosen to do this here, before everyone, and so we shall do it here, before everyone. You wish the whole of London to be the judge of my marriage? Then let them judge it with the truth in their hands, and not merely your most affecting version of it." He drew from inside his coat a packet of letters. "These," he said, "are in your hand, Seraphina. You will know them well. They are the letters you wrote to Captain Devlin in the weeks before our wedding, naming the day and the hour and the chaise you hired with money begged from your mother against a dowry that was already spent twice over. You did not run upon a foolish girl's sudden impulse, deceived by a wicked man. You planned it, for weeks, in your own hand. I hold these letters because Captain Devlin himself is here tonight, and he has spent this past fortnight hounding you for the debts of your own elopement, the chaise, the rooms, the lodging on the coast that he paid for on the strength of your promises. He came up to town to collect from a woman he believed was about to marry a duke." A cold, precise pause. He was persuaded, instead, that his interests lay rather in the truth, and that the truth was best told in person. "You did not come home to honour your engagement, madam. You came home because the man you chose over me ran through your money and abandoned you in a cold town by the sea, and a discarded duke began to look a great deal warmer than a debtor's lodging-house. That is the whole sum of your repentance. It is written in your own hand. It is owed in your own debts, and any proctor in England is welcome to read both." And at that, near the great doors at the far end of the room, a man came forward out of the crush, a hard-faced man in a worn soldier's coat, who had been waiting there at the Duke's word, and who now inclined his head once grimly to the whole staring assembly. Captain Devlin himself, come to collect a debt, and finding it settled in a coin he had not expected. He did not need to say a word. His presence said all of it. Every eye in the room understood at once what it was looking at. The lover Seraphina had run to, the man she had paid with money she did not have, standing now as the living proof of every letter in the Duke's hand. The room began to roar, that low, rising, hissing surge of 300 people, discovering all at once that the delicious story had a second floor, and that the floor had just fallen out from beneath its heroine. Seraphina had gone white to the lips. She looked from the letters to Devlin and back, and found no friend in either. Lady Ainsworth had taken a small, instinctive step back from her daughter, already, with the practised reflex of a lifetime, beginning to detach herself from a sinking thing. The proctor's clerk was edging toward the door with his leather case clutched tight, but Benedict was not finished, and the thing he said next was not for Seraphina at all. He turned, and he crossed the ballroom, the whole long, shining length of it, through the parting, murmuring crowd, every eye in the room following him, until he stood before his wife, before plain grey Hester, by the wall. He took her hand. He turned, with her hand in his, to face the watching room, and he said the thing that not one soul in England believed the Marble Duke had it in him to say. "I know precisely which sister I married," he said, loud enough to still the whole ballroom. "I have known since the first night. Seraphina, you forfeited your place at the church door. My wife did not." A sound went through the crowd like wind running through a field of wheat. "You speak of a deception," the Duke went on, and his voice was steady and clear and pitched to reach the very last row of the watching ton. "And there was one. I will own it here before all of you, so that no proctor and no gossip can ever again hold it over this woman's head. Yes, on my wedding day a veil was lifted, and the wrong face was beneath it. Yes, I learned on my wedding night that the woman who had spoken the vows beside me was not the woman named upon the settlement. I have known the whole of it from the first hour of my marriage." He paused, and the silence held 300 people fast in its fist. "And I tell you," he said, "that it was the best bargain I have ever struck in the whole of my life, that I would strike it again tomorrow, and 1,000 times after tomorrow, and stand here, in this room, and say so to every living soul in London." He looked down at her then, at his plain, unchosen wife, and the marble was gone from his face entirely, gone as if it had never been laid there at all, and what stood revealed beneath it was a thing the Ton had never in 11 years been permitted to see. "I contracted for a beautiful stranger," he said, "who would have ornamented my table and despised my land and my people. What I was given instead, what was pushed up the aisle to me by accident and by other people's panic, was the only person in the whole of my life who has ever troubled to truly see me. She rescued a library that no one would so much as let her keep. She learned the name of every tenant on my home farm, and which of their roofs let in the rain. She never once tried to charm me, and she never once lied to me, not on the night it would most have served her to lie, and not last night, when she put into my own hands the very truth that has tonight destroyed her sister, and asked nothing for it, and told me to choose freely, and trusted me, God knows why, to choose her." His hand tightened around Hester's. There was never a wrong bride, there was only the one who stayed. And there it was, the wound word, turned over entirely, the word the whole of London, and Hester herself, had used to mark her and mock her and make her small, taken out of all their mouths and broken and made into something else in public by the coldest man in England. The ballroom did not merely murmur now, it tilted. Hester felt the whole great gilded room turn, felt the ton, that fickle, tireless machine, swing in the space of a single breath from the beautiful penitent to the plain devoted wife, because if there is one thing the ton loves better than a beauty restored, it is a great cold duke fallen, against all sense and all his own interest, headlong into love. And Benedict Ridley had just handed them a spectacle they would dine out upon for a decade. Seraphina stood abandoned in the very centre of the floor, her white and silver triumph turned beneath her into a pillory. The runaway her own letters had unmasked, and not one soul in all that crowded room moved to stand at her side. Her mother had already melted backward into the press. The proctor's clerk had gone. The story had ended, and it had ended upon Hester, and the whole of London stood witness to it. But Hester was not looking at the room. She was looking at her husband, and there was still one thing she did not have, one thing the grand public declaration had not, could not, give her. For a man may choose a wife before a ballroom for 100 reasons of pride and revenge and the silencing of scandal, and she had to know whether he had chosen her for the reason or only for all the others. And he, who had learned over a long thawing winter to read her plain face as no one else in the world could read it, saw the question in it. He drew her aside into the relative quiet of a deep window embrasure, while the room behind them broke into a roar of talk, and there, lo, for her alone, he gave her the last of it. "I was married in another woman's name," he said, "and I have been afraid every day since, not that the world will call it void, but that you will, and walk out of it free of me." Her breath stopped. "That is the truth I had not the courage to say until tonight," he went on, and his voice, the cold, even Marble-Duke's voice, was not even now. It shook, and he let it shake. "I have wanted nothing for 11 years, because wanting is how a man is made a fool, and I had been made a fool once already, and I swore I would never pay that price again. And then a plain, frightened woman was pushed up my aisle by accident, and she would not lie to me, and she warmed my dead house without being asked or thanked, and she learned my land, and she saw past my stone as though it were not even there, and somewhere in this last cold winter I broke my own oath without once noticing I had broken it. I wanted something. I wanted you, and the terror of it very nearly drove me straight back into the marble for good, because if I let myself want you, then you might leave, the way everyone leaves, the way she left, the way I have spent my whole life so carefully arranging never to have to feel again. When the scandal came, and the law handed you every ground in England to walk free of me, I went cold. Not because I had stopped wanting you, but because I could not bear how much I did. I am sorry for it. I will be sorry for it the rest of my life." He took both her hands in his. "The register is wrong," he said. "We can set it right. We can be married again, properly, in your own name, before God and witnesses and the whole of London if you should wish it. But I will not have you do it because the vows trap you, or because the world expects it of you, or because you have nowhere else on earth to go. I have had a lifetime of people kept beside me by their circumstances. I am asking you, I, who have never in my life asked another living soul for anything, I am asking you to stay, Hester, not because you must, because you wish to." And Hester Ainsworth, who had been called the wrong sister by a whole county, who had been pushed up an aisle and married under a stolen name and offered a cottage to give up her life, looked up at the coldest man in England, who was not cold at all, who was the warmest and most frightened thing she had ever held in her 2 hands, and she gave him the truth one more time, because the truth was the only thing she had ever given him, and it had never yet failed her. "I learned the name of every tenant on your home farm," she said, and now her own voice was shaking, and her eyes had filled, "because I loved you, Benedict, before I had any right to, before it was safe, before I had the least idea whether you meant to ruin me or keep me. I think I have loved you since the night you laid a rug over a sleeping stranger and built up the fire so that she would not wake cold." She drew a breath. "I do not stay because the vows trap me. I have never in my whole life had so little holding me to any place on earth, and so let me tell you exactly what I choose, freely, before the whole of London, if you like." She lifted her chin. "I choose you, not the Duke. You. I would have walked up that aisle 100 times over, every one of them, if I had only known it was you waiting for me at the end of it." He kissed her then, in the window embrasure of the Marchioness of Holland's ballroom, before the whole of fashionable London, the marble Duke kissing his plain wife as though she were the only living creature in all the world. And the ton, which had come that night to watch a beautiful woman reclaim a title, went home instead with a far better story, and told it everywhere for years and years. Seraphina Ainsworth was gone from London within the week, and gone from polite society altogether within the month. There was no mercy for her, and no one left to offer any. The letters had done their work, her own hand had hanged her, and Captain Devlin's debt papers had hanged her over again, and the Tun, which forgives a great many things, but never the discovery that it has been duped, turned upon its discarded heroine with the particular relish it keeps for a fallen favourite. The invitations stopped, the doors closed. The very people who had murmured "There she is," the true bride now murmured something else entirely behind their fans, and Seraphina, who had thrown away a duke for a fortune hunter and crawled home only to be unmasked before all of London as exactly that, discovered at last that beauty unbacked by either fortune or favour is a coin that will no longer spend anywhere. She went into the country to a distant and reluctant cousin who would house her cheaply, and London forgot her with the same speed it forgets everything, and the title she had thrown away and tried to steal back closed over the place where she had been without leaving so much as a ripple. Lady Ainsworth fared no better, and had earned no better. The mother who had engineered the swap and then betrayed the daughter she had pushed up the aisle, the instant the other daughter looked the safer wager, found that when Seraphina fell there was no longer any winning side for her to attach herself to. Benedict was civil to her, coldly, precisely civil, because she was his wife's mother, and he would give Hester no fresh cause for grief, but he settled an allowance upon her, on the strict condition that she retire from London for good, and never again meddle in the affairs of his house, and Lady Ainsworth, who had not a single card left to play, took the money and the exile both. She retired to a small, genteel obscurity in a watering town, where she was fond of telling anyone who would listen the affecting story of how she had made her younger daughter a duchess, and where, as the years went on, fewer and fewer people could be found who would listen. Only Tom came out of it whole, and Tom was the one Hester had fought for from the very start. His schooling was secured, his whole future made. The Duke saw to it without being asked, and came in time to be genuinely fond of the bright, serious, grateful boy who was the single member of his wife's family worth the name. There were summers after that, when Tom came up to Harlow on his school holidays, and the great house rang with a young man's laughter and a young man's clattering boots, and Mrs. Beck pretended to be sorely put out by the disorder of it, and was, in truth, secretly delighted, because the house had not heard a young man's laughter in a very long time, and had badly missed the sound, for the house was warm now. That, in the end, was the thing Hester noticed most, in the months after the ball, when they had gone home to Harlow at last, that the great cold pile of stone which had met her on a black night like a sheer cliff was not cold any more, and had not been for some time, and that she had done it, quietly, room by room, the way she did everything, and without ever meaning to win anything by it. The library that her husband's grandfather had loved stayed warm and lit and full of the two of them now, of long evenings and longer arguments and the particular companionable silence of two great readers in one room. The tenants whose roofs she had quietly seen mended in her first cold winter learned to watch for the Duchess on her rounds, and to bring her their troubles, and she remembered every one of them. Mrs. Beck, who had given 30 cold years to a frozen house, gave the rest of her warm ones gladly to a thawed one, and never again called her mistress anything but your grace, in a voice that carried a warmth the title had never held in that house before. And Benedict, the marble duke, who had decided at a card table 11 years before that wanting things was how a man is made a fool, learned slowly, and then not slowly at all, to want a great many things, and to say so out loud. He had kept everything locked away for so long that the unlocking, once it had truly begun, would not stop. It was as though a man kept silent for half his life had discovered late that he could sing. He told her things. He told her about the grandfather, and the library, and the small, frightened boy he had once been before the world taught him better. He told her about the jilting, and the long, cold years that followed, and every separate stone he had laid down over himself, and exactly why he had laid each one. And she listened, and she saw him as she had always seen him, and the seeing of him was the thing that had thawed him, and the seeing of him daily was the thing that kept him thawed, the slow, ordinary miracle of being truly known by the one person near him who had never, even once, tried to perform. They were married a second time at the very end of that summer, in the same small church where the whole of it had begun, on a bright, still morning, with the doors of the church thrown wide open to the fields. There was no veil at all. That was Hester's one condition, and Benedict had laughed when she made it. He laughed easily now, a thing that still, on occasion, stopped the older servants short in the passages, that great cold man laughing, and he had agreed to it at once because he understood it perfectly, better than anyone living could. The whole of London had been invited, and a very great deal of the whole of London came, because a duke who had defied all of society to keep his plain wife was the most fashionable thing in England that year, and no one with any pretension to fashion could bear to miss the sequel. And so it was all witnessed, every part of it, every soul present looking on, exactly as Benedict had insisted that it must be. They were married a second time in the same small church with no veil at all, so that this time the Duke of Harlow might see exactly whom he was choosing, and let every soul present watch him choose her. He saw her come up the aisle with her face uncovered, and the morning light full upon it, her ordinary brown hair, her plain wide mouth that had stopped being plain to him a long while ago, and he did not stand waiting at the altar like a clock's hand reaching its appointed hour. He came down the aisle to meet her, which was not done, which scandalized the poor clergyman and delighted the entire congregation, because he found, he said to her afterward, that he could not bear to stand at the far end of a church and wait for her, even the length of an aisle, not this time, not ever again. He took her hand at the open door, in the light, before everyone, and he walked her up the aisle himself, the two of them together, and the vows they spoke this time were spoken in her own name, in Hester's own name, clear and unhurried and unafraid, by a man who knew exactly to whom he was speaking, and who let the whole listening world hear that he knew. And that, dear listener, is where I shall leave them, not on the wedding night, where a veil was once lifted upon a lie, but at the open door of a sunlit church, where there was no veil left to lift, and where a man who had once decided to want nothing at all stood out in the plain light of day and chose, before everyone, the one thing in the world he wanted. It is a strange thing, when you stop and turn it over, how much of our suffering comes from the fear of being truly seen, and how much of our healing in the end comes from exactly the same place. The Duke of Harlow built himself a fortress out of cold stone, because he had been seen once and found wanting, or so he had taught himself to believe, and a man who has been wounded in public learns too easily to mistake being seen for being hurt. He spent 11 long years making certain that no one could ever look inside him again, and he called that safety, when all the while it was only loneliness wearing safety's good coat, and the cure for it, when at last it came, was not a cleverer hiding place. It was the very opposite. It was one plain woman who looked at him without flinching, who never performed and never flattered and never lied, not even when lying would have served her, and who saw the man beneath the marble and did not turn away from what she found there. And being seen like that, wholly, with no veil left between, turned out to be the one thing he had spent his entire life running from, and the only thing in all the world that could ever have set him free. Perhaps you know something of that fear yourself. Most of us do. Most of us go through our days holding up a veil of our own, some careful, lovely, exhausting arrangement we keep between ourselves and the world, quietly terrified that if anyone ever saw the plain, unguarded truth of us, they would simply turn and go. And so perhaps the gentlest thing I can wish for you tonight is only this, that somewhere in your life there is, or one day will be, a single person before whom you may set the veil down, one person who troubles to learn the name of every tenant of your heart, and which of the roofs let in the rain, and who stays, not because they must, because they wish to. That is the whole of it in the end, to be known and to be chosen anyway. There was never a wrong one. There was only ever the one who stayed. So rest now. Let the great cold houses of your own worries grow a little warmer in the dark. Let the fears you have carried up too many cold staircases be set down, just for tonight, at the foot of the stairs. The library is lit, and the fire has been built up so that it will not die before morning, and someone has come quietly in and laid a rug over you while you slept. You are not the wrong one. You never were. Sleep well, dear friend, and dream of doors thrown open to the morning, and of being seen and of being chosen at last, in the full light of day.